What's up, guys? I have another Kydex video today, and today I'm going to discuss sheath retention. As you can see here, I made a sheath for my Dozier Yukon Pro Skinner. Not that there was really anything wrong with the original factory sheath that the knife came with, straight from Dozier. Bob Dozier makes very excellent sheaths. But, I have it over here to the side. There's really nice definition on the sheath and everything. Retention is good, the friction point's there. The only downside is the integrated belt clip. Now, when I ordered this knife, I knew that the sheath would only attach on the belt one way, and the problem is you can either get it horizontal carry for left or right hand, or you can get a vertical carry sheath, and it just wasn't really that convenient because sometimes I do like to carry my fixed blades, especially for everyday carry. I like to carry them vertically. So I ended up making another sheath myself. But what I wanted to discuss was adjusting retention on knife sheaths. When I first made this sheath, it was actually very loose fitting. If you can see here from the side, you can see a huge gap there. And that's because when I first molded the sheath, it was a very loose mold. And what happened was there wasn't a really good definition in the Kydex along where this handle is. And what would happen is the knife would just come out really easily. Right now, I think the retention is pretty close to where I want it. I'll just stop talking so you hear it. And then it also snaps into place relatively well. With the original sheath, actually, it snaps in really nicely. You hear like that just really nice definitive snap. But the only problem is it's really actually tough to get the knife out of the sheath. It takes like quite a bit of effort, especially like since I'm holding both halves, it's not so bad. But when it's on the belt horizontally, and because this belt loop isn't made for different size belt loops, different size belts, it is a little loose. I know you're supposed to keep it along one of your pants belt loops, but the thing is, that has some slack to it, and it takes quite some effort to tug it away. There is a thumb ramp here, which works out okay, but it's still pretty tough even with the thumb ramp. And I do find that, you can see here, since the top splits, when the knife gets partially pulled out, it's okay. It splits there, but then when the knife goes past its friction point, it can pinch the skin on your thumb. Not a big deal, doesn't really hurt, but it is kind of an annoyance. So what I ended up doing to adjust this retention was I pulled out my heat gun, and what I first decided to do was remold this area. Now, first I tried using just the press itself, but I found that either the foam material I'm using, that I got from knife kits, or just the pressure I was applying wasn't quite enough to get this really nice definition I wanted. Along this backside, it actually wasn't really this close to flush with the rest of the handle. It was actually flared out quite a bit. So what I ended up doing is, and maybe you can see that this edge over here isn't exactly perfectly flat, and I just heated up this section of the sheath and then pinched where I wanted the retention to be, and then I also pinched this top part closed. I'm not too concerned about how it's not even up top, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up cutting maybe close to like 3/4 of an inch from this top part, just so I can get a full handhold on the knife when it's in the sheath. I might also actually clip off this area here. It's a little unnecessary. I'm just not sure if I wanted to add another rivet there for something like a large tech lock. Right now I have it on a small tech lock. But when you look at different knives, generally with fixed blades it's a little easier to find the friction point that you need. Folders are a little more difficult, and there are certain knife designs in general that are just more difficult, just because there are these little things that kind of get in the way and like stick out and can get caught up on the Kydex. With a knife like this, since it's very simple, it's very smooth lines, the basic friction point is right here, right where this guard is basically. And if you actually look at the sheath, it's not really pressing friction fit up against the blade, which is why it's relatively no scratches other than the grind marks from Dozier's finish. But if you look up close, you can see that's basically the retention point right there. Other knives that I have, like, you know, the first sheath that I made, the Azula, I use basically the same friction point. Right here, you can see there's no wear on the powder coating on the blade itself, other than from use. But you can see here where that friction point is, the powder coat has worn away significantly. Let me see if I can get that to focus. There we go. You see it's kind of like worn down. It hasn't really rubbed completely away, but it has really smoothed it out and made it more of a shiny look to it. The thing with this sheath is this was just like kind of luck, I guess, and that it was pure pressure from the press itself. I guess when I made the sheath, I didn't really get the enough pressure on it to really get good definition. And that's another thing. Since this is 0.08 inch thick Kydex, it is a little difficult to get really nice impressions on it with knives. You know, if you were to make something like a gun holster, something that's thicker and more defined, then it wouldn't be as hard. I did order a bunch of 0.06 inch Kydex that I plan on remaking several sheaths, you know, especially this one since I did gouge it out. But you can see, because I didn't, like, I was happy with the retention at the time, but I didn't actually heat up this area. At the time, I actually didn't have a heat gun, and pinch here, and you can see that it's relying solely on the friction here, but there is blade play. Like, the knife does move in and out of the sheath here. It won't fall out, but it does move. It's not a huge deal, but, you know, most people consider it sheath rattle. And that's because when I was pressing it, it just wasn't enough pressure there. Maybe I didn't heat up the Kydex enough for it to really be really soft. I think it was more of a pressure issue, just, you know, working with the 2C clamps and the plywood and the foam just isn't as efficient as working with a hinge press. Another example is basically here, this A.G. Russell's Woodswalker that I bought the same time as the Dozier. I also made the sheath around the same time. I do regret using the thicker 0.08 inch Kydex for such a small knife because it makes the sheath very bulky. And I'm definitely gonna remake a neck sheath for this knife out of the thinner material. But when I first molded this, it was, you know, because this handle is so round, it was a very loose mold around it. It wasn't really a good definition. You know, like I said before, there was a huge gap here where it was really rounded out. But what I ended up doing was I tried pinching this entire section here and molding it really tight to the handle. And it worked out pretty well in that the retention was really good. But the only problem is when I had to put the knife back in, it was just too tight for me to actually like press this wide handle comparatively with this thin blade. It was really difficult for me to press it in, and this wouldn't really separate it and would bind up. So I ended up basically doing the same thing. I figured, you know, the best friction point for the sheath would be right here. Basically, it's kind of like the same point on the Dozier. And then I heated up this section of the sheath, put the knife in, pinched here, and then if I were to actually pinch this top, it would mold too close up against the handle. So I just kind of pinched the very tip just to kind of close both ends together. And it worked out pretty well. You know, right now, if you see here, there's actually a huge rounded gap, and then that was done on purpose just so this larger handle could fit. There isn't really that much rattle. I mean, there's a very slight bit of rattle, but nothing significant, nothing that you can really feel or hear when you're shaking it. Just when you're like tugging the knife out, the two parts of the pancake sheath start separating. So, the main point of this video is when you're making sheaths, you really want to be able to control where you heat up the Kydex. And basically that comes with getting a heat gun. You know, you can buy a heat gun relatively inexpensive for $10 to $20. They're very useful in that you can do segments of Kydex, heat it up in segments, and basically mold things how you want. Before I got the heat gun, if I wanted really like tight definition, I would have basically had a friction sheath on the blade, and what would happen is it would actually start scratching up the blade, which, you know, kind of deters from the finish, and you figure, you know, if any grit gets in there, it's really going to scratch up the blade. Let me see if I can find an example of that. Of course I can't. Well, basically what happened was I had made a sheath for my Benchmade Rant, and it has a neoprene handle on it. And because of that, I didn't want any retention on the handle, because eventually taking the knife out and putting it back in would wear away the rubber. Like this, I didn't have it covering any of the handle. And what that meant was, in order to get really good retention, I had to have a friction fit. And, because I guess I didn't clear out the sheath well after sanding, after inserting the knife a few times, it started to basically scratch up the blade. And it's a stonewash blade, but it's still pretty noticeable. The scratches are still pretty noticeable. So yeah, I hope you guys learned a little something about modifying the retention on your own homemade Kydex sheaths. You could do the same with even production knife fixed blade sheaths if they're made out of Kydex, or even if they're made out of molded plastic. You just kind of have to find a point where it's best suited to give you the best friction without the most wear from inserting the knife back and forth. And you can always just heat that area up with the heat gun and kind of pinch at it. You might want to wear gloves for it, because the Kydex is going to be really hot, and you're going to have to hold on to it for quite a bit of time and wait for the material to cool down. But it's just these small adjustments that you can make after the sheath is already molded without ruining the rest of the definition on the sheath. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.